This is live. It's 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Times here in Avalon. And for those of you who are not from Australia, it's in Victoria at the moment, down south, and there's going to be some aircraft movements going on. So bear with us. If you do hear anything, we're just going to let it pass and we're going to push on regardless. Malcolm, I'm going to start with you. You've been in this game for a little while. You've particularly been focused on the China sphere for many years. This whole idea of multi-domain battle management capability is a big part of the 2016 white paper. It's been working up for many years. Can you give us a bit of a context about Australia's focus in deepening its multi-domain capabilities and how that might work within what is an evolving geopolitical situation in our part of the world right now?
Sure. Look, I think multi-domain operations is the next step beyond joint warfare, which I think has been around for quite some time now. I think we recognise now that warfare occurs in multiple domains, in air, sea, space, cyberspace, and the electromagnetic spectrum, as well as land. And so the future force, the 21st century force, or the fifth generation force, if you like, has to be able to have effect and generate effects across all those domains in an effective manner. And so when we talk about acquiring future capabilities, there has to be that connectivity around those domains, because our adversaries, including the Chinese, are developing the same sort of capabilities. They're developing the means to challenge our military superiority within space, within cyberspace, in the air, as well as at sea and on land, and the electromagnetic spectrum. So we have to have, rather than stovepipe capabilities and platforms, we have to have systems of systems that can connect across a network and connect across multiple domains. And really that's the guiding principle that is driving our future force structure.
So for a lot of our viewers who might not be too familiar about the campaign, the program underway here in Australia to deepen our capabilities in multi-domain space, maybe a quick sort of 1 minute on what it is, what it means, and for you, what the critical success factors are for the Australian government if we get this right.
Look, I think at the heart of it is the RAAF's fifth generation force, of which the F-35 is a key component. But it's not just about a platform like the F-35, it's about how the F-35 acts as a node on a network to be able to connect to other platforms, whether it's another tactical fighter aircraft like a Super Hornet or a Growler, or whether it's a ground force unit, perhaps operating in an armoured fighting vehicle or a ship at sea. And it's also about how we used unmanned systems to not only act as communications enablers and systems enablers, but also to provide information, and then ultimately space, and how we incorporate the space domain into it. And so developing that connectivity, that systems of systems, is I think a good step forward from where we have been in the past, where a platform-centric approach to force structure has inevitably led to stovepiped development of those capabilities within specific services. So Navy develops its own capability, Air Force develops its own capability, and they don't talk to one another. And that limits our military effectiveness overall if we continue with that.
Yeah, so I'm going to stay with you for a moment, because I'm just trying to set this scene. Do you think the Australian government actually knows, does the Commonwealth know what it wants yet? Are we still trying to work this thing out, or are you quite confident that we've looked at the problem, we're working up a solution? Because I know there is going to be some contracts starting to be awarded over the coming years in relation to this, but are we still just working it out? Or
no, I think we understand it. We understand the concepts. We understand how it affects doctrine and tactical operations, and how it affects warfare at the operational level. Certainly we have a way to go in terms of getting the force structure and the capability in place, but we're moving down that path, and we are a lot further along than a lot of other countries who talk the same talk, but really they're still practicing either platform-centric single service approaches, or maybe they're starting to get into joint integrated operations, but they haven't yet made that next leap beyond multi-domain operations.
So what's your view on this, Simon? You obviously cover a lot of ground in your role with Northrop Grumman. Australia is just one part of a global community who are all sort of wrangling this particular issue, and it's driven by external threats, but it's also driven a lot by technology innovation. What's your sort of feelings toward what's happening here in Australia and how well we're doing compared to maybe some of our global counterparts?
Well, I think the Australian Defence Force and the Royal Australian Air Force in particular have done a tremendous job of shining a torch on the issue. I mean, think about the Plan Jericho paper. It came back out in January 2015. It was, I think, one of the first of its kind, and it set conditions, I'd argue, for other air forces around the world to think really clearly and carefully about how they want to develop their next generation air forces, how they want to integrate to multi-domain operations. I would reference this really excellent Royal Air Force strategy document that came out a year or so later, which talked about delivering the next generation Air Force and connecting and integrating new and legacy platforms, and really similar themes to that which was highlighted around delivering a fifth generation Air Force for the information age, which are the founding principles of what Jericho set out to do, and I think he's continuing to do now. So I really would applaud the efforts that they've gone to here and making this into a topic of conversation that we're engaged in here today, and many others across academia, industry, institutions, and of course our government customers are engaged in. And of course, a huge stimulus towards this entire conversation has been and is the arrival of F-35. Transformational capabilities it's going to bring to the battle space. I think Malcolm was absolutely right to talk about not just fifth to fourth, but I call it 5 to 4 to 5 to more communications, because it's not just a fifth generation F-35 connecting to a fourth generation fast jet. It's also disseminating that valuable F-35 information to ground forces, to maritime forces, and bringing in the opportunity to genuinely get to multi-domain communications and connectivity. Which I think we're now on the precipice of, and it's truly exciting times. I think one thing that we in industry need to be really careful of is not to believe that every Air Force is going to have the same viewpoint to this. It's a very easy to take a catch-all approach. There will be different CONOPs, there'll be different TTPs directed by different operational environments. Sure, there'll be similarities, but understanding where those differences are and understanding the subtle changes to the approach that those of us working to support the customers is going to be foundational to making this a success moving forward.
And I know the eyes of Australia are on the Air Force right now. We had the arrival of the first two F-35s in December last year. They're going to be on display here over the next couple of days, which everyone's pretty excited about.
Right.
But it's a lot of work to be done. You know, we have this capability now, but to actually get it linking up with all parts and all areas of the services. And maybe this is a question for you. This is probably the first question we've got coming through here. Mike, I'm going to put it over to you, mate. You're sort of my voice of Aussie sensibility here on this panel, and we have strategists in the middle and our counterparts over in England. But there's a question here from Steve, and Steve asks, is there any particular Aussie industrial capabilities or strengths that are suited to multi-domain tech?
Yeah, I think that's a significant challenge for us here in Australia, and I think we look at the just our population and the resource limitations that we have by way of human capital, and as Simon's alluded to, and we're really looking at down the barrel of how do we grow that talent locally, and I think globally people are looking at us as to how clever we can be, because we don't have the depth of as I say, human resource capital. We've got to think smarter as we develop these capabilities, and the ability to manage the amount of information that I think is going to be flowing around this multi-domain space. And so I think it's through our investments in STEM, the collaboration with academia, and it's great to see that that's blossomed over the last few years, and building those capabilities in a national context and moving away from the state-based or city-based type approach, because I think we've got to be all in this together to be successful.
Good. Remember the questions to the right-hand side of wherever you're watching this right now. Send them in, we'll answer them live on air, which is quite a first for the defence industry. We have Mike Gallagher and Simon Cooper from Northrop Grumman, and Malcolm Davis, he's from ASPI, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. And I might feed over to you again, Malcolm. In the corridors of power in Canberra and elsewhere where the defence establishment are located, how much airtime is this multi-domain space taking, and sort of you're filling up people's minds with how we can approach this particular issue, where the challenges are, and what happens if we get this wrong?
Look, multi-domain operations and capability is an important issue, but there's many important issues that the decision makers at Russell and also up on the Hill are wrestling with. I think that we have a golden opportunity in the next few years because we are going to have an election. We could have a change of government, and it's I think it's quite an opportune time to talk about a new defence white paper. The strategic outlook has moved very rapidly since the 2016 white paper, and a lot of the assumptions that underpinned that white paper can be challenged, I think. So we should be looking at a new white paper, and that would be a golden opportunity to put multi-domain operations and fifth generation force to...
Here goes one of the ways.
To put multi-domain operations and the fifth generation force to the fore, and to really get the political decision makers and the capability managers understanding the intricacies of developing this capability, because it's not just about an F-35, it's about, well, we need a resilient space capability to be able to get the information from platforms like the F-35 or a Triton or a Poseidon to the rest of the force.
Right.
And for example, the space domain is now contested, congested and competitive. It's no longer this peaceful sanctuary that sits above terrestrial geopolitics. So we have to think about how we maintain those links where an adversary is trying to attack our space systems. So this is a really complex issue, and it needs to be uppermost in the minds of decision makers when they think about moving on from the 2016 white paper, from the integrated investment program, and developing a new force structure that looks beyond 2028.
So Mike, we spent some time a month ago over in the States, and a lot of briefings from your team at Northrop in 3 different locations around Air6500 program. Looking back at those conversations I had, there was a couple of key themes that come out about how you guys were addressing or looking at this challenge of the multi-domain space. And what was clear to me is that the architecture of this thing is absolutely critical, and it needs to be important that it's democratized in some way, so that not one prime or not one vendor actually controls a whole lot with vendor lock. Can you give me a bit of an insight into that?
Yeah, look, I mean, architecture is going to be the key to the door, I think, in the future as we look at this, and the vendor lock issue of the past. You know, there's been discussions many times in the past about people talking about open architecture and really not as genuine as it could be. And I think the future has really got to have that openness about it. It's going to require the broadest engagement. You come back to the Australian question of how are we going to do this in country. So the architecture is part of the puzzle. It's the partnerships and the engagements that we've got to create and bring everybody to the table to be part of that process. Because I think there's no one company, I think, that can solve the problem on its own. It's going to require that team approach, the partnership approach, and it behoves us to take a leading role in that if we can, and that's what we're investing in at the moment in Australia, to build that engineering talent, to bring the expertise that we have from the US, transfer of knowledge, transfer of technology, so that we can bolster the local capability.
And your view towards the potential for the sort of Aussie domestic supply chain to get involved in say Air6500 or multi-domain space. We've got some very talented SMEs here. Often they sort of challenge to actually get up and get income contracts around particular programs. Outreach for Northrop in this regard, will you be leaning on Aussie SMEs to get involved in something?
Absolutely. I mean, we've got a very robust global supply chain program as it stands. I think our AIC strategies and plans are well established. In fact, we'll be locking down a couple of those while we're here in Avalon this week.
Okay.
We've had great engagement with a number of Australian SMEs, and they are very much part of our future. And that we're not in the business of hoovering them all up. It's that engagement of getting them involved from the earliest part of the process. Invitations to being part of our lab environments. If they've got something they can bring to the table, then we're open to having a look at it in every way possible.
And it's in our interest to do so. And we don't have a monopoly on good ideas, and we build those sustaining long-term relationships with small, with medium organisations. They in turn bring new opportunities that we maybe are not best placed to serve, but they are. But perhaps we can help them to build their teams and those enduring partnerships. That's a theme which is for Northrop Grumman as paramount here as it is elsewhere. We have other global markets. The UK, it's very, very similar. The aspirations there to grow the organisation and to become part of the fabric of Australian defence, become part of the fabric of UK defence, is something which Northrop Grumman is determined to make that shift, and that's something which takes commitment, takes effort, and takes leadership, and we're blessed with some superb leadership in both of those countries.
I might extend, there's a question here which is in line with this. It's from Janie. It says, are industry members really willing to cooperate as much as required to provide integrated capabilities? So the Australian paradigm, your experience sort of globally, do you think our industry here is ready to actually get together and make this happen, or do you still think it's still stovepiped for Malcolm's points?
No, I think regardless of the country, you have to listen to the customer. The customer has to be the guiding light here. And I think as I mentioned earlier on, the Australian customer has been really forthright in setting out a vision, in setting out the direction of travel, the direction around the 5th generation Air Force, whether it's 5th generation, whether it's next generation, and there are differences of opinion about the linguistics. I think it's that understanding of what the customer is looking to achieve, and then building those enduring partnerships. No one company from any specific country necessarily has the right answer. It's going to have to be a development, and not just from industry. It's going to have to be academic institutions, think tanks involved too. As a former boss said to me a long time ago, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. If you use them in that ratio, it's extraordinary the difference you can make working with your customers.
And I think I would add to that this is going to be an ongoing process. We're not going to find the solution to multi-domain operations and it's in place and we're all happy. There are projects now underway in the US and Europe towards next generation air combat capabilities. Some people talk about 6th generation capabilities, other people kind of getting away from that nomenclature because it's sort of reminiscent of very long project cycles. But those capability projects are moving ahead very rapidly. And so whatever system we put in place for multi-domain operations to work with the 5th generation or the 4th generation has to be able to upgrade and move along to the next generation of capabilities.
Well, there's a great question here, Malcolm. I'll feed this one over to you because it's actually in practice talking about how these different platforms can work in unison. It's from Anonymous. How far away is the RAF from demonstrating CEC links between F-35s and Royal Australian Navy DDGs, given HMAS Hobart has proven it with the USN last year?
We've already done it. There was a test earlier between a Hobart class air warfare destroyer and F-35, I believe. So if we haven't already done it, we're very close. I think that there are issues in terms of getting the F-35 to talk to 4th generation platforms like the Growler and the Super Hornet. But certainly I think that probably the Navy is well placed with Aegis to be able to connect into F-35, and we've got another jet coming down the runway.
Coming on, so give us a second. Remember to check out defenceconnect.com.au for waiting along.
And look, I think with the Hunter class frigates coming online, in the late 2020s, we will certainly be well positioned by then to ensure that full CEC capability.
And running off from that, for you, Malcolm, as well, and gents, if you want to give us your thoughts on this as well, how might a multi-domain capability provide Australia with a capability edge in future regional conflicts? So I guess the question is, what's a future regional conflict going to look like?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and Malcolm, you probably answer that one, I think.
Yeah,
and,
look, I think
that
it doesn't. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to know that China is the key rising power in the region. They are the ones that are being very assertive in terms of their behaviour in the South China Sea, their challenge to Taiwan, and I think that's the big concern that is focusing everyone's attention. So we have to think about how we'd fare against the Chinese PLA as part of a coalition, in particular with the Americans. I think that they are moving so rapidly in terms of both quantitative expansion and qualitative enhancement that is going to be really challenging for us to make the assumption that we'll always have a technological edge. Gone are the days of the 91 Persian Gulf War where we had the luxury of 5 months sitting in the desert preparing our forces and then we went in and swept the board very quickly. That's not going to happen in the next war. Yeah. We are going to have to struggle to gain and sustain air superiority in the next conflict, and we will take losses. And these realities have to be faced by decision makers. And I think what we need to be doing is working on building a future force that is not brittle, At the moment we have a brittle force where we have small numbers of very expensive, very capable, exquisite platforms like the F-35. But if we lose too many of them, our capability falls away. And in a future conflict with China, we are going to take losses such that if we don't have a larger force, whether that's manned or unmanned or whatever, if we don't have that larger force, we are going to be at a disadvantage. So my concern is that we are preparing for the last war rather than for the next war.
Yeah, Malcolm's comments reminded me actually, I think it was a statement made back in 2016 by the Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force around future multi-domain operations being high velocity, agile and joint by their very nature. And that concept around high velocity, things are going to happen fast. We have to be agile. We're going to have the underlying architectures in place to be able to repair networks, have self-healing networks, to look at really carefully around the command and control communications infrastructure and how we're going to manage, because it will be disrupted. It's inevitable. The threats are non-traditional, they're coming from traditional sources, they're kinetic, they're non-kinetic, and they're fast changing. So that concept around high velocity, agility, and jointery, which remains, and Malcolm said it up front, we are moving from joint to multi-domain, but the whole concept of jointery is as relevant now as it was. It's just being embellished with the whole concept of looking beyond single domains to bringing together all of those air, land, sea, space, cyber, and the wider EM spectrum into a common picture.
And there's a question here which I might channel your way, and it's interesting because the Northrop Grumman's investment, you obviously have, there's a big parent back in the US with billions of dollars spent on research and development and the enhancement of platforms which have utility here in Australia. Your view for the role of Northrop Grumman within this multi-domain space, Air 6500, what are you and your team doing, particularly here in Australia, to sort of beef up your presence and capabilities to ensure you can participate in these programs?
So, as I indicated earlier, we are continuing our investment in Australia. So, in the, I guess the last 4 or so years, we've gone from a handful of people to well over 500 now. We're bringing in the expat expertise. So that's not putting expats in country on a permanent basis, but for every expat I'm bringing in, I'm hiring an Australian to come in behind them, and that's going to really build the opportunity for us to work with the other industries, and depending on how it falls out, whether we take a leadership role or a partnering role, we just need to see what that structure looks like. But I think the important thing we're focused on is really transferring that knowledge and the capability that we've got in the US and bringing it into Australia, acknowledging the limitations that we do have, working with academia, as I said before. But I think the real opportunity for us in the fullness of time is the ability to then re-export. I think the rest of the world's looking at what we do in Australia to some extent, because we are a smaller force, we have to be agile, so we have to think differently and operate differently. So we in turn can export that back to the US, for example.
Yeah, and I think I just want to pick up that investment in organic capability, working with the institutions and the academia, hiring folks with good ideas, thinking differently about how we go ahead and hire talent, and looking to create capabilities which are born here. And then, as Mike said, if we can get into a position where we can work with Australian Defence to export those to other countries, then fantastic. It's that combination of bringing capability in from elsewhere, but also developing it indigenously. It's as relevant here as it is in our other focus areas that the corporation has.
Yeah, and the question here is, I think it's a fair one. It's a general question: why does government industry invest their attention and resources to attend events like Avalon? Why are we here? For me, it's a great showcase of capabilities for Australian business, and there's a lot of business being done here. But why do you think it matters?
It's vitally important because it brings together people of a like-minded approach to, and it's an air show, but it really is a defence show, and there's a great opportunity for the interchange and exchange of ideas. The creation of relationships throughout. We ourselves have got a raft of meetings set up with small, medium enterprises throughout the week. It's a great opportunity for those people to be in one place at one time, whereas the challenges, certainly from a geographical context in Australia, the ability to get round and see all those companies, to build those relationships is much harder. So that's why we're here. And I think the importance too is we're seeing the changes in government and the way government is thinking about the projects of the future. We're seeing a much more open approach with our SPOs. Their willingness to avoid the second guessing of contracts or tenders of the past, because it doesn't benefit anybody. And when we're trying to be agile, it's a great opportunity to sit down with those folks in this environment, as well as obviously look at the aeroplanes flying around.
Yeah, there's a lot of that coming.
There's a lot of that going to happen.
And Malcolm, we're sort of running through time really quickly here, but your view, you spent some time both in the establishment and now within ASPI. How interconnected do you think the different services are in working together to a common cohesive goal? There's always conflict between the services, but they all have their priorities. Are they actually working, from your view, cohesively together to address this multi-domain space?
I think they are getting a lot better.
Yeah.
When I first joined ASPI, one of the tasks I did with my colleagues was the Capability Snapshots project, which is basically looking at Army, Navy, Air Force and command and control, and where are we at with the various different capability development projects. And back in 2016 when I did that, the conclusion we came to was Army was falling well behind the other services, with Air Force way out in front. But I think if you did that same exercise today, I think you'd find Army is caught up a great deal in terms of its command and control capabilities in particular, and Air Force and Navy are singing from the same sheet in terms of multi-domain operations. I think that the problems now are not so much sort of mindset, do we really need multi-domain ops? Everyone understands we do. The problems now are getting the systems and the networks in place and getting them functioning, and then developing the doctrine on how we use multi-domain operations most effectively. We are a small force. I think we need to be bigger, but we are still necessarily a small force, and so we need to be able to plug and play with our allies in particular, but we also need to be able to share information across that multi-domain space within the ADF. And I think it's getting those systems and technologies in place and then saying, okay, so what does that do for how we fight wars? And understanding at the conceptual level, that is really important.
So whether at the conceptual level or doctrine level, do you think we have the talent, is the leadership in place both within government but also industry to steer us through what is a pretty significant development program here?
Yeah, I do. Look, we've been talking the language of joint and then multi-domain operations for some time now. I think everyone is familiar with it, not only within the uniformed military but also within the Department of Defence, and I think that at the political level, the impression I get from listening to Christopher Pyne speak, he's switched on to the technology, he understands it, and I'm sure that whoever is in the Labor portfolio, if there was a change of government, would be equally as adept. So I think that we have a good basis at the political level, we have a good basis at the governmental level within defence, and we have a solid core of expertise within the ADF itself. And industry, of course, is the final part of that puzzle. And I think that when you look at companies like Northrop Grumman or Lockheed or Boeing, everyone is talking the same thing, it's multi-domain operations.
And it's all about the interconnectivity systems and systems. It's a big program, and it's a question here from Dave, and Simon, I might get you one to answer this, mate. Given the software intensity of multi-domain systems, how can industry and the ADF work together to timely and on budget delivery of these projects? So the budget thing's it's a pretty important word. You can have the best thing in the world, but if it costs billions to get there, it's often not that useful. So your views towards balancing time, speed, utility and budget with programs like this?
Yeah, I mean, it takes, it's complex for sure. And the systems are software enabled. That's clearly the way we're going. And putting the infrastructure in place to allow, ultimately to allow the organic development and sovereign control over some of the aspects of the way systems are used is going to be really, really important here. It's already important here. It's important elsewhere as well. I think from an industry perspective, it's incumbent upon us to think really carefully about how we deliver the systems into service, and how we look at the long-term sustainability, and we look at the long-term partnerships that are going to be required to make what are complex and highly intensive capabilities workable for the long term. So the great danger is putting something into service without the infrastructure in place to make it work for the customer and to make it work for the warfighter. And you know, sure, we've made mistakes in the past and we've learned those lessons, and others have too. And it takes and it continues to take a huge amount of focus in order to get that right.
And it's important, you know, there's lots of questions coming through, so we might not be able to get to all of them today, but please keep them coming. We can aggregate them here on the Slido side, or you can email us at editor@defenceconnect.com.au, and we'll get them answered for you with these guys here or other people. I'm not going to use this last question here maybe as a summation point, because I think it sort of encapsulates most of the things we're chatting about now, and I'll get each of your views and observations on this. This is from Brian. Brian asks, what do you think are the key risks and challenges in developing a multi-domain capability in Australia? So you're going to answer it obviously from a Northrop Grumman Australia perspective.
The key risks and challenges, I think we've covered a lot of those. It's the local talent, it's the ability to grow the base here. It's important that we do look to the future. As Simon said, it's all well and good building a system, but that long-term sustainability, that long-term development, we've got to look at it as a total package. I mean, gone are the days where we just go out and buy things. We need to look at the systems approach. How does this interconnectivity work in that multi-domain space over time, and how quickly do we want to move versus the risk we're prepared to take? And so there's a lot of thinking got to go into that as we move forward into these key programs.
And Malcolm, I might get you to frame this based on, I guess, Australia's sovereign industrial capability involvement in this particular program. We're talking about some pretty sophisticated platforms all talking and linking with each other. Role for Australian business, the role for Australian SMEs, our academic institutions. How much of this stuff do you think we can actually make homegrown Australian?
I think we have a pretty good basis for that.
Yeah.
I was at the Space Industry Summit yesterday, and if you look at how space industry is developing in this country, it's moving very rapidly. And as I said earlier, space is a critical element of multi-domain operations. If we don't have a space segment, we don't have multi-domain capability. So Australia, I think, is well placed to be able to provide that. They're well placed to be able to provide the other elements in terms of multi-domain operations. I do think probably a risk in my mind is that we get caught up on providing the multi-domain capability for the here and now force and not start thinking about the next generation force that's going to be appearing in the 2030s. As I said earlier, we have to keep pace with the race. We can't afford to say, well, we've got the F-35, it talks to all the other systems, that's all we need. It's not good enough. We do need to be able to move to that next generation and move rapidly and decisively.
And I think, just picking up on that, Malcolm, I think Australia is extraordinarily and uniquely positioned. E7, which has performed superbly in operations over Syria and Iraq, and has been referenced by prospective customers as a reason why they're looking at that E7 capability to replace aging E3 platforms. If you think about the linkages between E7, Triton coming in here into the Australian AOR, with F-35, with EA-18 Growler, with P-8, this is unique. This is the only country to have all of those platforms in the AOR operating together. So the TTPs that the Australian Defence Force put in place to make those platforms work, but not only as an air domain, but across space, and with the maritime, the future maritime force, and obviously the recent decisions have really set the bar very high around the future maritime capability which Australian Navy will be bringing into service. So again, I would say, coming in from outside of Australia, we need Australia to continue to lead in that TTP development and that conceptual development, because it's actually at the bleeding edge of multi-domain operations, and I think it will stay there for some time.
Well, thanks. So we've covered a lot of ground in 40 minutes here, and I feel like we're just started at the surface. But I think we covered some key issues, just how the multi-domain capability sort of fits within an evolving geopolitical landscape. I think in particular for Avalon, the opportunities for Australian business and connecting in with the global supply chain as we go down this path of working it out. It's encouraging to know that it sounds as though the government the Commonwealth know where they're going with this. There's still a lot of work to get done, but the leadership, it would appear to be right, both within uniform and out of uniform. So we'll keep focused on this. But gentlemen, thanks for your time. I'm going to be leaning on you moving forward.
Thanks, Phil.
You're my go-to guys around this right now, so expect some phone calls from me. But I hope you enjoyed that. We're going to be back again here tomorrow for another live stream, Autonomous Systems, at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're recording here from the Avalon Air Show 2019. Remember, if you didn't get your question answered, you can email to editor@defenceconnect.com.au. Alternatively, put it into the Slido system to the right-hand side of your screen right now, and we'll put them all together, we'll aggregate them, and we'll get them answered over time. And remember, defenceconnect.com.au. If you're not subscribing to our daily morning newsletter, so you're the first to know what's happening in defence and defence industry, it's defenceconnect.com.au/subscribe, or social media, just search Defence Connect. That's the end of the podcast. There's a plane coming through right now, but thanks for joining us today. I've really enjoyed this live stream, and we'll be again here tomorrow, 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, recording from Avalon. We'll see you then.